Just link in the description to keep learning while you drift. What made you click? Title, thumbnail, or topic? Imagine yourself in a quiet room after sunset, a room with the hush of cooling fans and the faint perfume of warm electronics. A monitor glows softly with slow, spiraling lines that trace the paths of objects you cannot see out the window, the faint arcs of satellites and fragments slipping over oceans and continents. The air has that gentle laboratory stillness, a blend of clean paper and a hint of coffee that has gone warm and sweet. You hear a distant chirp, like a cautious bird, from a tracking console, acknowledging another scheduled scan. Somewhere beyond the walls, a radar dish leans its face toward the sky, releases a ripple of radio energy, then listens with patient attention for a whisper returning. It is unhurried, methodical work, in the soft end-of-day cadence that never tries to impress because it has simply been done, and done, and done again. In your mind's eye, step outside the building into the cool night. The grass is damp, the air steady and almost still. If the sky is clear, you find that familiar suggestion of a river of stars, pale and quiet, and underneath it you picture a network of invisible roads. Some curve close to Earth like ribbons around a globe, others stretch wider, more distant, hanging over the edges of continents in slow, graceful loops. Along these roads, old tools drift, not villainous, not heroic, simply objects that once had a purpose and now have only motion. A gold foil fragment polished by sunlight, a corner of a broken panel, its composite layers cross-hatched like a whispering reed, a harmless screw unless it finds itself on the wrong course, a peeled paint fleck, no bigger than a seed of sugar, hard and quick in thin air as if it were glass. They do not glow, they do not hum, they simply travel, guided by momentum and gravity, and the tinier changes of drag and sunlight that add up over many days. Inside, you settle before the screen again, and the map presents its quiet ballet. A dot moves from one edge to the other, and when it slips beyond the horizon, another dot appears, and another, always with a calm insistence. You zoom gently. The dots become labels. The labels turn into thin curves with numbers attached to them, and you read them as if they were names of winds. Low Earth orbit, where the air is thin as a thought and still enough to tug gently on anything that brushes through. Medium Earth orbit, higher and slower, home to timing and navigation that pulses through the glow of cities. Geostationary orbit, a far ring where satellites stand above one line on the Earth, in patient attendance, like lamps hung along a silent road, and above them graveyard orbits and the timid outliers that drift between. Each space is a room in a house with many rooms, each with a quiet set of rules. Picture a technician's hands opening a worn binder, pages creased at the corners. The checklists are neat, the font is unassuming, the steps are the same as yesterday, and this is a comfort. Conjunction assessment, that simple phrase that means watching for the moment when two objects may meet too closely. On one page, a time window, drawn as a grey bar with soft edges, not sharp, photons fold into the model, the math becoming less fuzzy, more content in its own skin. Imagine the radar itself, standing under the night sky like a quiet listener. It sweeps, it pauses, it listens again. Radio waves go out smooth and return starved, stretched and softened, carrying the faint story of what bounced them back. A fragment answers with a brief flicker. The computers cradle that flicker and assign it a place and speed, both with a tender margin of doubt. Across the ocean, an optical telescope watches instead. It does not see fragments the size of grains. It sees the polished pieces, the satellites with their tidy flashes, the rocket bodies that roll and reveal again, sending a glint at a rhythm that becomes a signature. The telescope's dome opens with a hush, the air cool on the glass. The motor hum is so gentle that it could be the sound of a pet sleeping. Every movement is deliberate, respectful of silence. Somewhere else a laser pulses up to a cooperative reflector, mounted on an old mission. The beam invisible, the return, a suggestion, a few photons at a time. The clocks in the room hold their breath between ticks to notice when the light returns. Distance is written not as a straight line, but as an interval of patience. The catalogue of objects grows, page by page. Two-line element sets become like fingerprints. Observers share updates, and the files change with the weather of the sky. What looks simple is built on layers, antenna calibrations, timed against stars that do not move, bias estimates trimmed like neat hedges, conditions noted, a gust of wind, a page of clouds, a high-altitude ripple of air that makes the beam wobble just enough to matter. The tone of the work is tidy, domestic, like cleaning a tabletop that slowly gathers dust. Each new sweep collects a little more dust. Each log entry wipes the surface in even strokes. You see how the rhythm builds a comfort. When nothing dramatic happens, that is the achievement. Now you drift outward in your imagination to one of these fragments. It is a little square of multi-layer insulation, edges curled. It does not know what the planet below calls day or night. It feels sunlight and grows warm, then slips into Earth's shadow and becomes cool. Warmth makes it breathe. Polymer and aluminum moving by 1,000th of a whisper, and that tiny motion nudges its path. A sunlight breeze of photons pushes on it as well, adding a sigh of force. When it falls a little closer, the wispy atmosphere brushes it with invisible fingers, slowing it so gently that it barely notices. Over weeks and months and years, the gentle resistances carry it downward. Toward the end, when the air grows substantial enough to matter, the fragment begins to drift in front of its own bow wave of heated air, and then softens into the environment. The story ends not with spectacle, but with dissolution into the medium, and a return of atoms to the fluid that flows around the planet. From this particular fragment, you move your attention to a different, heavier piece, a spent rocket step left tumbling in the band of space used by many travelers. Its surfaces are sometimes shiny, sometimes painted, sometimes action feeling light and heat in a different way, so it tumbles. Instruments on the ground measure that tumble, the period like the heartbeat of a massive bird, gliding with wings extended. The period stretches in sunlight, compresses in shadow. A signature is kept, and the entry goes into the ledger. One day, decisions will be made about this object. Will it be coaxed down into a careful re-entry, guided to a lonely zone above an empty ocean? Or will it be eased upward at the end of its active life into a higher, slower graveyard orbit where it bothers no one and drifts like a retired ship anchored above a horizon? Neither option feels dramatic. Both feel like housekeeping, like folding a blanket and setting it gently upon a shelf. Imagine yourself in the control room where these decisions begin. The quiet figure of an operator leaning back, listening to the whisper of cooling fans and the rain of small status messages moving across a panel. Nothing alarms. The language of the messages reads like the steady murmur of a patient librarian, confirming that the books are stacked in the right order. The operator looks at the schedule. Windows are marked for burns, those short puffs of thrust that enter the record as very small changes. A gentle sideways push, not much more. The cryogenic valves must be warmed. The mixture ratio is checked. Even the check for checks is checked, not with suspicion, but with craftsman care. In a corner, a chart gives the flare of solar activity for the week, because the fullness of the sun's breath swells the upper air, and a swelling atmosphere tugs more strongly on the lower orbits. Space weather and space housekeeping hold hands. Now allow the thought to widen. You picture a generation of satellites outfitted with tiny sails that can deploy at the end of life. The sail fabric is crisp and light, folded a dozen times into the space of a book. One day, the satellite is ready to rest. Commands arrive. A latch releases. The sail opens as carefully as a paper lantern unfolding above a table. The crinkles soft and polite. The area grows, the drag grows, and the orbit begins to lower more quickly. The satellite does not complain. It has completed its tasks. A good tool, after all, is put away with intention. Elsewhere, another design carries a slender ribbon of conductive metal, a tether that can be unspooled and allowed to draw a bit of electrical current from its dance through Earth's magnetic field. As the tether feels the field gently resists, and that resistance becomes a hand on the shoulder guiding the satellite downward. The currents are small, the forces are small. They are enough. Elsewhere still, an experiment tests a soft net that can open like a flower and fold around a derelict piece, then cinch with a slow draw, preparing the captured object for a planned descent. Another team practices with a robotic arm, learning to find a gentle hold point on a slowly turning target. The camera on the chaser craft watches for clues, sun glints that reveal edges, shadows that reveal depth, small markings from manufacture that act like constellations for the machine vision system, building a map of the way the object turns and where it might be steadied. The arm reaches not like a snatch, but like an attentive hand that waits for the right moment to offer support. Jaws matter of steady breathing and simple physics, mass met with mass, small thrusters paired in response to slow rotations until the two bodies move as one. Then comes the unhurried journey to a safer altitude, or toward the gentle shimmer of brake heat in the upper air. On the ground, the legal notebooks add their pages too. They speak in calm language about responsibility and sharing, and the obligation to leave a place as tidy as one can after work is done. There is a chorus of agreements that has grown over years, agreements that suggest satellites should release stored energy, batteries vented, tanks warmed and relieved of pressure, reactive chemicals set to neutral, so the sleeping object is peaceful. Engineers call it passivation, a word with the softness of a late afternoon. It is a reminder that even in the precise world of orbit and angle and velocity, there is room for the concept of kindness. Imagine the quiet dawn hours in a tracking center after a full night's shift, when the first bird shapes pass across the window and the screen's pale light begins to share with the day. A report prints with the practical exactness of a lab label. There is a note about a conjunction that came and went without incident, and behind that plain note, an entire cascade of attention and care that was performed in order, unhurried. A planned avoidance maneuver shifted an operational satellite by a few centimeters per second, just enough to give comfortable space, and the motion will be trimmed back in a few days with equal calm. So many things function silently that a small steadying whisper can keep them right. As you continue, the mind begins to trace the layers beneath this work. There is the physics of orbits, which is merely to say the mathematical poetry that describes how things fall around Earth and miss the ground, again and again, each miss becoming a graceful loop. You picture a path not as something drawn on the sky, but as a relationship between speed and altitude, like the balance of a seesaw, faster and closer, slower and farther. You feel that dependence in your chest as you breathe. A satellite in low Earth orbit glides at perhaps 7.5 kilometers each second, the air too thin for sound, but not too thin for the faintest rub. In medium Earth orbit, the motion slows, longer loops that can be counted easily by the patient clocks inside navigation satellites. In geostationary orbit, a full ring takes 1 day, and there is the peculiar comfort of holding position above the same bay, the same desert, the same cluster of city lights. The word station is apt. In all of these spaces, gravity guides everything downward, while sideways motion keeps everything away from the ground. The art of tidying lies in adjusting that sideways motion just a little, just enough, and always with respect for the many neighbors that share the sky. Think now about the way people organize their work. A team that devotes itself to conjunction assessment will wake to an overnight collection of messages from sensors around the world. They begin with an intake process that is almost like making tea. The water is data. The filter is quality control. Old measurements are steeped together with the new until a flavor emerges. Each track file is tasted for oddities. Outliers are set aside for later sips, not thrown away, because sometimes the odd flavor teaches. The main pot is poured into a serving vessel, an ephemeris, a schedule of object is the complex coordination of thousands of moving bodies above a spinning planet. The words soften a task that is hard if you try to do it all at once. The pace invites success. Imagine yourself practicing a ritual that aligns with this pace. Perhaps you straighten your desk. Perhaps you wipe the surface with a cloth that smells faintly of lemon. Perhaps you stack papers into a neat pile, simply because it allows the eye to rest on a clearer field. The same feeling can be found in the broader act of space housekeeping. Existing satellites are issued standards to include a plan that will bring them down within a certain number of years after work ends when they live in low orbits, and to move them into a steady graveyard when they live in the far ring. Mission designers learn to bargain with their craft between the efficiency of tight fuel budgets and the decency of cleaning up afterward. Older missions did less of this, perhaps because the habit was less mature. Newer missions build it in as naturally as a checklist includes the line that says, "Confirm off switch." With this sensibility, there are even experiments in using ground-based light, not to burn, not to blast, but to tap gently in the form of a tiny push. There is the concept of a laser sweeping across the surface of a fragment at a distance, imparting a subtle change in momentum, not precipitous, just like a finger guiding a bead along a string. Those who work on this speak carefully. They measure how targets absorb and reflect. They account for the air, for the way the beam is smeared by turbulence, and for the need to ensure such tools are used for neighborly purposes. Again, the mood is housekeeping, not heroics, and the vocabulary is full of tests, calibrations, and modest trial runs. As the story widens again, you visit a museum-like lab where pieces of space-worn material are studied. A square of Kapton, its golden film scuffed, carries a record of its travels in a constellation of tiny pits where micrometeoroids once passed. A strip of carbon fiber shows how layers separate when spun and heated over years. A piece of aluminum that once wore white paint now looks like an eggshell with spots, each spot an old fleck that left, itself becoming one more tiny wanderer. Scientists examine these textures under microscopes, not hurried, not breathless. They have a slow conversation about charging, about how sunlight liberates electrons and shadow collects them, about how edges and corners nurse electric fields like a winter scarf holding static, and how this can accelerate particles to nudge surfaces ever so slightly. They speak of materials and bonded seams that can relax the built-up voltage in gentle ways, so that release is not sudden and does not break the peace of the spacecraft. This is the kind of minute detail that lulls, because it is small and careful and kind. Take a breath and imagine drifting far beyond where the atmosphere holds useful heat. The night there is not cold in the way a room is cold. It is its own sort of absence. In that absence, even a small warmth from sunlight means a great deal to a thin panel. A panel loses its heat quickly in shadow, radiating not into air, but into emptiness. This cyclical warming and cooling is not violent. It is simply a whisper, a slow tightening and relaxing of materials that never yourself walking in thought through a clean room on Earth, where future satellites are assembled. The air is filtered, the lights are bright but gentle, the floor feels resilient underfoot, with the sound of footsteps softened, almost polite. People wear garments that look like uniforms of kindness, soft hoods, masks, gloves that keep skin oils and dust from wandering places they would not be welcome. Sticky mats peel specks from the soles. There is the faint scent of isopropyl alcohol and the neutrality of scrubbed air. Every surface is untextured and white. The propellant system is built with the same care as a teapot that must never drip. Cables are bundled as neatly as hair smoothed for a picture. This is where prevention begins. Choices here become less work later. A small thread left to float will become space lint. It is not left to float. A cover that can peel is chosen for a covering that will linger as one piece. Edges that could catch are rounded. These are not heroic acts. They are tiny decisions repeated until a culture takes shape. Bring your attention back to the sky. Consider the idea of shared space and shared schedules. There are many operators now, each with a constellation of craft moving like family migrations across the same region. The language of coordination is careful, measured, professional. It is full of planning messages, channels kept open even when there is nothing urgent to say, because silence is not the goal. The goal is awareness. When a satellite plans to lower its altitude by a few kilometers, a soft message goes out. The receiving teams add that plan to their maps. No one is surprised. No one is left guessing. The result is a sky that feels less like a place for racing and more like a place for gardening, where there are rows and patches and paths and a sense of taking turns. The analogies are quiet, because quiet analogies remind the mind of things it knows already, like how a library stays orderly when everyone who borrows a book brings it back and sets it gently, exactly where it belongs. Call to mind the thoughtful design of a deorbit burn. It begins with a plan that reads almost like a recipe. First, determine the current orbit with care. Then, warm propellant lines. Then, aim the thrust ever so slightly behind the motion so the craft loses a little speed. Then, watch and measure, and if needed, add a second pinch of adjustment. Timing is everything, but here timing is not a test. It is a comfort. Then there is waiting for the natural tug of air to complete the story. Later, the telemetry shows the heating of the outer surfaces, and engineers check the path of fragments that might survive, and they choose the open, watery parts of the world, far from ships and shore. This, too, is a version of kindness. It is not spectacular. It is good stewardship. The same ethos reaches up to geostationary orbit. There, at the end of a long mission, a satellite eases up a few hundred kilometers to a place where the neighbors gathering along the ring will not be bothered by its slow drift. The retirement burn is gentle, like the movement of a picture frame a few inches higher on a wall. The satellite vents, blanks its batteries, points its body in a way that minimizes the small forces of sunlight that could tumble it into trouble for others. It is set to a safe, passive pose, like the way a book is closed and is just another light in a calm room. A pause here at about the centre of our journey tonight to honour how far your thoughts have floated and how restful your breath has become. If you wish, share a gentle check-in with us in the comments to keep the sleepy circle going. How sleepy are you on a scale of 1 to 10? We continue deeper into the craft of sifting. The word sifting suggests sand running through fingers, and that is a helpful image. Imagine a beach where the grains are bits of orbit, and the sieve is a set of algorithms that were not built in a hurry. The sieve has coarse mesh and fine mesh both. The coarse mesh catches rocket bodies, old satellites, larger panels. The fine mesh captures smaller shards that can still trouble those who pass nearby. The person at the sieve is not frowning. The person is focused, relaxed, unhurried. Each pass through the sieve produces a small pile, and each pile is labelled and set aside. Later, someone else views the piles with fresh eyes, checks the labels, and adds a small note to each card. The work is slow because it is careful. The care is what makes it succeed. To move an object out of harm's way, first you must know it is there. The sensors on Earth do much of this, with radar carefully scheduled to revisit parts of the sky in patterns that cover and recover, and optical telescopes that sweep when the lighting is right, when the sun is below the horizon here, but still lifts objects in orbit into a low, grazing glow. There is the faintest flutter of atmosphere that sometimes disturbs starlight, called seeing by astronomers, and this too is measured and corrected gently so that the image of a moving object can be placed exactly where it belongs. The mathematics that govern this correction does not live in a hurry. It uses averages over proper intervals, and it reduces noise by relaxing into the data rather than pushing it. The software voice is a whisper. Then there are sensors in space. These too help with the tidy aims because they see without atmosphere. They are small satellite watchers, working not to take a dramatic photograph to share, but to note position and motion so that another line in the ledger becomes clear. When the ledger notices two paths converging in an unfriendly way, the ledger sends a nudge to the operator, who takes a breath and undertakes a well-rehearsed dance. How much fuel do we have? How long will the adjustment take? How and when can we restore the prior geometry afterward? Where are the others who might cross our new path? Each step is a note. Each note is gentle. Picture then the debris that is hardest to see. Bits the size of a pea, the size of a lentil, wandering fast and small. These are below most registries of tracking, but not outside the thinking of the tidy. Satellite designers add shielding in layers, like an onion skin, so that a small particle is softened by foam and spread across metal that can absorb it, the way a down comforter softens the shape under it. Sensors are placed to feel the strikes of tiny impacts when they occur, and over years, to map whether a certain orbit sees more grains than another. These maps are not frightening. They are simply a kind of weather chart. Designers move their craft through these patterns as sailors once moved through wind lines drawn on paper by memory and observation. On the other side of the ledger is gets quiet after their work is done. They open valves so tanks are at peace, because a tank holding pressure for no reason is a tank that may, someday, find a reason to let that pressure go. A sleeping battery is allowed to sleep rather than to be surprised with a spark. Fasteners that could loosen are chosen with coatings or designs that hold their own small discipline, like tiny children taught to stay hand in hand. New materials are chosen with slow thinking about what will outgas least, what will not peel at the edges, what will arrive home more whole when the story ends. The net result is like tending a garden, where fewer leaves fall to the path, so less raking is needed. You may find it peaceful to think about the way fragments are studied, like little travellers with biographies. A chip of paint which launched in 1 year may be traced through occasional radar glints across many months and given an identity, a set of orbital elements that carry forward in time with gentle updates. The paint chip becomes a known friend in the catalogue, though only through mathematics. It will never be seen with the eye, never be photographed. It will simply be respected as part of the environment, like a small rock that a careful gardener knows to step around. When the paint chip finally drifts lower and dissolves in air, its file can be closed, and the closing is restful. Consider the accountants of momentum who work with the tidying missions that remove larger pieces from orbit. Their work is not simply to grab and go. It is to think patiently about the center of mass, about the rate of spin, about the slow interplay of sunlight and shadow, about the shape of the target and where to hold it so that the pair moves with the least complaint. They find the angles where pushing becomes effective without drama. They practice on a simulator, but the simulator is not a video game. It is a careful physics twin, tuned by data from past encounters, polished by test runs in long, gentle pools of airless chambers. When the operator lifts a hand to direct the robot arm, it is almost like reaching to catch a floating leaf in a still room. There is a right way to move. There is a right moment to close fingers. The rest is watching, noting, and making small corrections, as simple as breathing. Some dream of tiny shepherd satellites as a future common tool. These shepherds would keep station near known large derelicts and gently encourage them into safer orbits, one at a time, like a person who straightens frames on a wall as they walk down a hallway. Each shepherd would use a contactless method, perhaps a magnetic field for a conductive body that produces a torque without touch. The torque works against the spin. Once the target is quiet, a nudge gently changes the orbit in a planned way. The shepherd does not finish in a day. The shepherd takes weeks, months, because slow forces are sufficient when time is ample. This is the nature of the environment. There is little friction. You can do much with little if you are patient, and patience is the signature mood of our story. The story cannot help, in kindness, but to glance at what happens when orbits host more objects than is comfortable. In the past, collisions have produced clouds of fragments that drift and spread around the globe. Rather than recounting them sharply, we note simply that these events taught lessons in restraint. average day. Think of a person who leaves the lab and walks under the open evening, the screen glare replaced by the silver-blue glow of twilight. Their head is clear, not heavy. They take comfort in the small tasks well done. Perhaps they brew a simple tea, and as the steam spirals, they let a thought spiral too, about the quiet order that good systems create. They tuck their phone into a bowl and do not check it for an hour. They sit by a window and watch the changes of light on a wall. This feeling is, in a way, the same feeling they bring to the console when the next shift begins. A steady inside makes a steady outside, and a steady outside creates a sky where many can share a crowded space with grace. Let the mind roam to the cislunar region, to the space between Earth and Moon, where objects move in older rhythms. The distances are larger, the light is similar, but quieter. The rules change a little, and operators feel them the way sailors feel currents that do not reveal themselves to the eye, but do reveal themselves to the rudder. There, too, will grow the need for careful traffic habits in the future, because missions will pass through that region more often. There will be staging orbits, transfers that hang for a while in the gravitational midlands, and someday there will be tools for tidying there as well. It will not be urgent. It will be planned. It will be added to the routine. The moon will remain itself, serene and distant, and humans will accept the ancient truth that where we go, we bring the need for sweeping and sorting and setting things aside with grace. In this broader house of orbits, the light sometimes comes from Earth as well. Cities throw upward a dull glow. Poles ring with aurora when the sun speaks a little louder. Even these conditions find their way into the small, careful world of housekeeping. The aurora tells of energized particles that grow the skin of the upper air slightly, and this growth changes the account of drag for that night. The signals of ground instruments travel through ionized layers that are constantly shifting. Operators record these changes and add them to the next morning's plan. The thought remains gentle. Nothing is a crisis. Everything is a variable. Turn your attention to the lives of the sensors themselves. A radar dish collects rain and dust as the months pass, and someone climbs to brush and rinse and test. Bearings are oiled, bolts are checked, cables are reconnected after storms. An antenna on a mountain sits in rime ice through a winter and wakes to spring with a long exhale of frost, and a technician drives up a zigzag road to tighten a connector that is loosened by a millimeter. In a desert, a telescope hides under a moving dome that keeps the dust off its mirrors. The dome sighs open each evening and sighs closed each dawn. Inside, a person in a soft fleece jacket and comfortable shoes replaces a filter in the airflow system and wipes a handrail with a cloth because the rails matter for spirits as well as safety. Each instrument is part of the same practice. It gives and takes care. The room responds with quiet reliability. Imagine a meeting where the task of identifying high-priority objects for removal is discussed without heat. The criteria are written on a whiteboard in a tidy hand. Cross-sectional area, mass, altitude, orbital inclination, same order. A ranked list appears gradually. Each item on the list is a patient project, not a trophy. Funds are assigned. Schedules are tentative, but plausible. Testing happens first on the ground, in air tables and drop towers and vacuum rooms that hum like refrigerators. When results arrive, they are folded into the plan like spices into dough. The dough rests, rises, and is baked in its time. Beneath the planning sits the quiet floor of international standards. There are guidelines written by committees that do not seek credit. They specify the steps and time frames, the shapes of reporting forms, the ways to count, and the ways to communicate. Engineers and operators read these like recipes, not like manifestos. The alignment between nations and companies is not perfect, but it is comfortable enough to keep the kitchen ordered. Over time, the recipes are amended, and those amendments flow graciously to the next generation of missions. This is political in a lightweight, practical sense, not in a heavy, dramatic sense. It is neighbourly, and the atmosphere of the rooms where it happens is like the atmosphere of any office where people decide how to keep the hallways clean and the lights on. What does a day in orbit look like for a piece of debris the size of an apple? During each pass through sunlight, it warms one side and cools the other, and the tiny bit of outgassing shifts from one seam to another. It turns slowly, not sure if it wants to point toward Earth or away. Occasionally, a slight bulge in the atmospheric density reaches up to touch it, and its path grows a hair shorter. This repeats endlessly, with modest differences. The irregularities add texture, but no drama. Over months, the apple speeds over many lands and seas, and its relationship with Earth's equator and the tilt of its path changes with the slow breathing of the planet's bulge. All of these motions can be written down with mathematics that feels like a lullaby. There is satisfaction in watching the predictions hold true for long stretches. Validation arrives like the second hand lining up with a mark on a clock. There are labours of attention that never end. Calibrations, for example. A laser ranging system has to know, to within a whisper of a whisper, how long its light takes to go and return. That means clocks must be compared to other clocks. Those comparisons ride on microwave signals that also need calibration. The chain reveals itself as long and delicate, and the people who maintain it step along its length with the focus of gardeners moving down a row of seedlings, looking for a leaf that needs turning. A little water here, a little movement of soil there. These small acts add up to beauty across a season, and in the same way, careful calibration adds up to confidence across years of watching and keeping and tending a sky we cannot touch. If you like, picture one specific mission that exists to gather a derelict satellite and escort it gently down. The chaser craft begins in a similar orbit, a respectful distance away. It measures and watches for several orbits, like a patient driver waiting for a safe moment to merge. It calls home with quiet updates. It reduces its separation until the target fills the camera view to a comfortable degree. The chaser moves sideways with puffs of gas, as soft as a person exhaling through linen. The target's movement is a slow tumble, and the chaser does not hurry to match it. It moves into a frame on the far side, reads the motion as if reading a dancer in slow time, then chooses a step. Over the next orbits, small pulses of thrusters and the extension of a boom calm the target's turning. The stars drift behind the pair. Earth's limb glows like a pale ribbon. When the tumbling quiets, the chaser's hand reaches, and the latch closes with a tone. The two hold each other and exhale. Down they begin, with low thrust and even patience, into a corridor that has been checked and checked again. When the air takes the scene, the chaser releases the target at the right height and angle, and the final fade begins as heat blossoms in thin, hypersonic sheets. The chaser backs away, watches, records, and then raises itself to try again on another derelict. It is routine kindness. In the background of all this, data lives. It is stored in redundant drives that hum like faraway insects. Backups are made on schedules that repeat like clocks. Copies are sent to cold rooms under mountains, to vaults in buildings where the light is always gentle. Metadata is appended, noting not only what the data contains, but how it was taken, what the weather was, which operator was on duty, what settings were used. Everything that can later be useful for understanding is preserved, because understanding saves effort later. The tidiness of the data mirrors the tidiness of the sky. Persons who love order love both. Occasionally a satellite needs to dodge not debris but a neighbour, a friendly crossing of paths that asks for courtesy and timing. The language of the messages exchanged is friendly and formal. The times are listed in universal format. The intervals are given with a soft margin built in for comfort. The result is a dance that shows that even without a single conductor, many dancers can avoid stepping on toes simply by listening well and communicating clearly. The comfort of that lesson keeps people in the field, smiling. Think of the gentle textures involved in making space-safe electronics. Radiation is a quiet adversary, not angry, just present. Engineers build noise tolerance into their systems the way a parent places guardrails on a crib. Memories are wrapped in error correction that politely fixes a flipped bit and carries on. Shields are used where they help, but not too heavily, because weight must be respected. In software, processes restart if they ever yawn too widely. Controllers check the checks again with low suspicion and high reliability. These systems, made robust, are less likely to misbehave, and less misbehavior means fewer unexpected events that could shed fragments or end with a craft in a place where it should not be. Good parenting of machines is part of good housekeeping of orbits. The practice of soft coordination extends beyond objects to signals. The air around Earth is knitted with radio frequencies that serve people below and machines above. Schedules and allocations allow everyone to hear and be heard with minimal overlap. And when a system glitches and interferes, kind engineers send calm notes and quiet teams find the source and resolve it without heat. The result is a sky with fewer accidental shouts and more clear murmurs, which in turn reduces You may enjoy a small detour to a place where the deep sea meets the upper air, where the analogy of sifting finds another home. Oceanographers drop fine meshed nets to gather microplastics that drift among plankton. They work in the early morning when the water is glass, and their nets return with legitimate samples that are then rinsed through a sieve and sorted under a magnifying lens in a lab that smells like salt and ethanol. The scene is serene. It shares a spirit with our orbital housekeeping. Different medium, same care, tiny courses corrected by gentle hands. You recognize the comfort of seeing different fields share this patience. Now, come back up the ladders of the atmosphere to the satellites that watch Earth's weather. They too must occasionally reshape their orbit to remain in tune with their intended tracks, because their collective job is to form a uniform grid of observations. Each correction is a little poem written in the language of altitude and phase. The poem never raises its voice. When one instrument drifts too far ahead, a small burn slows it down a shade, so the Earth moves beneath it more quickly, and the instrument falls back into step. When it drifts behind, a little speed is added. The string becomes taut again. The more tautness, the better the combined song. In this way, even the work of forecasting a rainy afternoon benefits from the tidy discipline of orbital housekeeping. Reflect for a moment on the human body that supports this work. The eyes that scan, the hands that type, the back that straightens in a chair, the breath that slows when a choice is before it. You can feel your own body matching that pace, shoulders softened, jaw relaxed, eyes growing heavy. The mind takes in sufficient detail to be content and to rest, because it no longer feels the urge to hunt for more. Everything necessary has been said. Everything else can wait until morning. This is the atmosphere of a quiet control center at midnight when all is well. It is also the atmosphere of your room as you listen. If your thoughts drift to the edges of the system, that is welcome. There are distant Lagrange points where Earth and Sun and Moon combine their pulls to create saddles and plateaus of motion. These places will someday host watchers and perhaps dust of our making. When they do, we will bring the same broom and brush set to those invisible rooms. We will write guidelines for how to leave those neighborhoods tidy. It will be a continuation, not a new chapter, and continuity is a reliable lullaby. The subject bends gently toward the artistry of naming. Debris fields are not fields at all. Orbits are not rings in the way a ring on a finger is a solid loop. They are paths traced over time by points that never stop moving. Calling them rings, calling them fields, helps the mind shape them into something understandable. Words are tools, and in this house, tools are cleaned and stored after use, their edges safe, their handles pure. The soft language we use tonight does not hide the truth. It dresses it in comfortable robes so the truth may be received by a tired mind and accepted. And in acceptance, the mind softens even further. There are small delights in this work, and they deserve mention. The first time a new telescope resolves a faint glint that used to be lost in the grain of night, the way a fresh algorithm reduces the uncertainty of a path by a hair and and saves a satellite from a maneuver it no longer needs. The moment when a laser ranging pulse returns cleanly, and the graph draws a sharp peak that returns like a heartbeat on a screen. The way two different teams, unaware of each other, converge on the same conclusion, and their findings nest together like hands finding a comfortable fit. The smile that traces the lips of a person alone at a console when a plan works exactly, precisely, quietly, as intended. These are the gentle sparks that do not wake anyone. They are warm coals under ash. Should your attention wander to the thought of re-entry, let it do so with the lightest touch. Most objects finish their work far above and fold into the top of the air later, their atoms scattering to join the sky again, and the sky receives them without difficulty. Sometimes more careful guidance is offered to larger pieces to ensure the final brush with the air happens where no one is present. This is not a scene for fireworks here. It is a slender, flowing scene, like the last inch of a candle melting. Those who shepherd these descents follow checklists with calm in their hearts and thank the craft for its service, with their hands on the console and their eyes soft. At times there is also the work of education. Engineers and scientists who have learned these slow habits share them with students and colleagues in rooms whose windows frame a sky widening toward evening. The presentation slides are plain. The fonts are friendly. The examples are careful and chosen to show the shape of the work without drama, so that new workers can adopt the rhythm of tidying from the outset. The more the rhythm spreads, the more beautiful the sky becomes as a shared resource. Like any shared kitchen, the more each person washes their own cup and sets it to dry, the more pleasant the next person's experience will be. Tonight's theme would feel incomplete without acknowledging that many disciplines support this. Material science, optics, signal processing, orbital dynamics, software engineering, human factors, policy, communications. Each is a room in the house. Each room is dusted occasionally and rearranged as furniture changes. People move through the rooms daily, not hurrying, greeting each other softly, setting down a report, picking up a notepad, adjusting a schedule, printing a sticker, peeling a label, and placing it where it will help. The house itself is peaceful, and the rooms have windows that look out on a world rotating at a steady rate. The world is very old. The motions are very old. Our gestures are small by comparison, and yet matter to us because they sustain the clarity needed for us to keep watching the sky and listening to the quiet conversation between a planet and the things that fall around it, closer to ground level. In workshops, technicians practice catching things with nets and booms and gloved hands, sometimes in water tanks that mimic weightlessness, sometimes under cranes that offload most of the weight. You hear the lapping of the pool. You hear the rubbery squeak of a glove on an arm. You see the reflection of a white ceiling in the pool's surface, and you see dots of tape marking positions under the water. Practice runs. The work is repetition. The muscles learn what the mind has been taught. The impatience that can arrive at the beginning of learning drains away. set of hands writes code. The code is not the cleverest for its own sake. It is as clear as a road on a map. Variables have names that tell their story. Functions are short and do one thing well. Comments are present and kind. Tests run while the coder sips a cup of tea. The tests pass, not with trumpets, but with a single line that says success as plainly as a porch light turning on at dusk. The software joins a family of other gentle, reliable tools and is deployed to the system that watches or guides or sorts the data that later shapes a decision to move a satellite by a curl of speed at dawn. The chain is long and every link is tended. In the months ahead, many teams will add their touches to this practice. Mega constellations will coordinate to share information about where each craft is, where it plans to be, and how rocket stages will be guided down and away. New agreements will ask that satellites carry reflectors or beacons to render them easier to see for both radar and optical watchers, not unlike placing reflectors on bicycles so they can be noticed in evening light. The sky will become busier, and because of this, the habits of tidiness will become more deeply valued. It will feel natural to include a deorbit plan as a design requirement, to include shields for the size class of debris most likely to be present, to include a module that can be swapped out rather than replaced, reducing waste. Reuse softens the need for replacement. Replacement softens the risk of orphaned parts. All of this is a smoothing of rough edges. In a small lab, a team works on a new surface coating that resists ultraviolet erosion and extreme temperature swings, prolonging the time a piece can serve without shedding. The test articles sit under lamps that mimic sunlight and under gold plates that mimic shadow. They are stressed and relaxed, like a gentle tide. Over hundreds of cycles, the better materials show themselves by the absence of flakes. The flaking that does occur is captured and counted and studied, and the results are fed back into selection for future missions. Again, the mood is iterative and calm. There are also actuaries who quietly do the arithmetic of risk. They add numbers that represent the expected cost of not cleaning to numbers that represent the cost of cleaning. They add the cost of one collision avoided to the cost of one more fuel tank included for deorbit. They present these sums not in stern tones, but in practical ones. The numbers tilt the decision a little toward more care each year, not because alarm grows, but because evidence accumulates. The evidence takes the shape of curves that flatten gently when good habits are practiced. That gentle flattening is exactly what restful thinking prefers. Extend yourself just for a moment into the imagined future when we reach out beyond Earth orbit more often. We will pass by asteroids and gather samples, and even there, the ethos of tidiness will accompany us. Sample containers will be closed cleanly. Instruments will be parked. Surfaces will be treated to avoid releasing dust that could interfere with trajectories. A ship cruising by on ion thrust will polish its path with millinewtons, soft as breath, for days and weeks, and when the time comes to dispose of a stage or a tool, engineers will choose a path that leaves the least long-lived signature. voices far away and close in spirit. Back on Earth, a clerk keys in the day's updates to a registry. A law student reads through case studies on liability gently and highlights sentences in yellow. A communications specialist drafts a post that explains in plain words why a scheduled avoidance maneuver adjusted a television satellite's timing by a fraction, and why your programs appeared a sliver later. The tone is patient, friendly, and it honors the reader's calm intelligence. Education is itself a form of housekeeping. It clears the air. It straightens the common table. It lays out the cutlery, so conversations can proceed without small stumbles. Think too about how we mark success. In many fields, success comes with applause and bright sound. Here, success comes with a lack of news. Flights proceed. Conjunctions pass by with margins preserved. Catalogues update without surprise. Instruments hum. Displays show no red. This is a deep, restful kind of success. It allows nights like this one to continue, where we can sit together for many minutes, talking softly about how quiet competence keeps the world running. There is a strong medicine in that for minds that carry too much noise. If at this point your eyelids grow heavy, that is welcome. Let them rest. Keep listening with that softer part of your attention as we bring the last threads of tonight's fabric together. Picture once more the map on the screen with its fine curves. Each curve is a long ellipse that touches the world at two gentle points higher and lower, and the earth itself turns under them. The combination of those motions creates patterns that repeat slowly, like the pattern of waves at a shoreline over days, with tides. The watchers of these patterns find ways to fold their activities into low points of risk, high points of opportunity, and the steady pace of betterment that grows as the habit of tidiness becomes culture. A final image before we draw the curtains of this night. You stand on a hill in the quiet suburbs long after traffic has thinned to the occasional distant hush. Overhead, a satellite passes, a steady dot crossing the dome slowly. It neither streaks nor flares. It is not a spectacle. It is a participant in a shared space, moving among many other participants, their presence unseen but known. Behind this mild dot is an orchestra of watchers and cleaners, of sifts and logs, of patient calibrations and gentle burns, all of it labor performed by people who know that the world runs better when we tend to the small things. You are part of that orchestra simply by listening, by understanding, by appreciating that the unglamorous work often holds the most beauty, because it is the closest to the rhythms that comfort the heart. The gentle rhythm continues. Your breath matches. We are returning now to the room where we began, to the soft glow of screens that are dimming for the night, to the fans that still whisper but somehow seem even more mild. You find yourself grateful for careful people doing simple things well. You carry that gratitude into your pillow, the way a librarian carries the last book to the return cart at closing. Not rushed, not delayed, just right. Rest in the knowledge that somewhere, while you sleep, others are keeping the orbital hallways safer. You are safe here, in your own quiet orbit of blankets and breath, in a room that has its own gravity and light, folded around you like a soft cloud. If this gentle journey has relaxed you, let it carry you the rest of the way down. Allow the body to sink. Allow the thoughts to soften. If you feel like it, send a small thanks with a like and subscribe so we can keep releasing these calming explorations for you this often.